Good evening, everybody joining me tonight. I want to talk about the spoil the vote Maria Steen ousting from the presidential race in Ireland just this week. It's been a very interesting occasion, and I think there's a few things to say about it. And you know what? I will actually try to keep it short, just to speak about some of the most pertinent things I've noticed about it, and I'll try not to rehash the usual things that people are saying if I can. Um, but at the same time, some of it's just obvious. It's been very, you could say, eye-opening. It's not really though, because we know how anti-democratic Ireland is in many ways. Those of us who are paying attention, but this really put a fine point on it, and I think there's a few things to explore there. So, yeah, good evening anyway. Anybody who's up, I know it's Saturday night and you should be out at the disco or watching a movie or something, but alas, you're here with me. Um, it could be worse. So, yeah, Maria Steen. I wasn't too familiar with her. I was familiar with her from her recent advocacy on the referendums for durable relationships, women in the home, etc. In was it last year? I believe last year, right? And if I make nothing else clear, there's just one point I want to make on Maria Steen. For those who don't know, she ran for the presidential election. She ran quite late, but she's a very estimable figure, esteemed, and it should have been an obvious shoe-in, no problem. Why wouldn't it be? You have a three-horse race for president, which is narrow. The candidates don't differ that much from each other. And like I say, Maria Steen is a highly obvious person to be on the ticket. And we would have all expected, I mean, that's why it's notable. We would have all expected her to be on it, regardless of process or procedure. You would just think, well, that's just obvious. If she should be able to pick up the phone to, I don't know, the civil service, Dáil Éireann, whatever, and just say, hey, I'll run there. And they say, sure thing. Obviously, there should be no issue with that. And insofar as there's some bureaucracy in the middle, like the nomination from councils and senators and TDs and all of that, that should just be a formality. She should, at the outset, have 3 times what she needs straight away to get in. There should be no dispute, even for people who disagree with her. It doesn't matter. That should just be a formality, and that's how we would all kind of see it. Surely. And what we actually have is this highly regulated, highly institutional sort of Sanhedrin type, Star Trek type council, this convoluted process that can be effectively rigged. It's meant to work a certain way. It's meant to keep, crazy people out or something like that. But actually, as we see with Maria Steen, it can be weaponized against a dangerous candidate, a popular, relevant candidate, to exclude them for political and regime convenience, effectively. So we kind of all know that. But one of the things I wanted to point it out was that, okay, like let's do the CV case for Maria Steen, right? I'm sure you know. A qualified architect, barrister, Montessori teacher, parent of 5, stay-at-home mother, successfully won a set of referendums. I'm just going to say referendums. Not on her own, but I think she was credited more than anybody else. There were various people. Michael McDowell, we'll get to him. Leisha de Bruyne, all sorts of people who partook in that and advocated for a no in that set of votes. But I think it's understood that Maria Steen was the queen of that success. She debated Micheál Martin on whatever it is, primetime or something. That was the big debate. clearly he's the Taoiseach, he was the Taoiseach at the time, I believe. But that was the big head to head, and she beat him fairly handily in that, and played a huge role. So just going back to the basics, she's basically like a caricature of a successful, well presented person. She almost is like some sort of like something out of a 90s movie, where she's this successful woman, graceful, all this kind of stuff, intelligent, educated, whatever. But if you actually think about it, it's not okay. She fulfills that, right? She's this kind of perfect person. That's basically how she's seen, and how she comes across. No scandal, no this, no that, never trips over her words, is in complete control of the kind of political discussion and debate and the rest of it. Like something out of a petri dish, and I don't say that in a negative way, like something you made up, right? So that's the individual, because usually they maybe come after the individual, personal failings, whatever it is. She basically doesn't have any, right? Which is rare. I mean, literally, you could scan the country, politician, journalist, anything. You basically can't find a person who is as polished as she is. That's the individual. But now you talk about what the individual represented. She represents this kind of broad understanding of like right wing, sort of conservative, loosely. And she keeps it vague. I'm a conservative Catholic. Yeah, we get that. A lot of people in Ireland, ordinary families, don't feel represented on issues such as immigration. So she doesn't really make a point on immigration, but she nods to it, right? So we all, like both her opponents and her fans, all acknowledge what she is. Everyone from like the hardcore anti-immigration people to the kind of Christian conservative, or the Catholic conservative kind of crew, right? Everything from immigration to Enoch Burke to women in the not expanding the definition of durable relationships to polygamous families, you name it, just all of that. She kind of could be an avatar for that whole thing, right? Now, how big is that group? We have the abortion and the gay marriage referendums, which were, what were they, 2015 and 2018, I believe. Could be wrong. Somewhere there, a while back. And they were passed in favor of them. But there was a 40% vote against that, right? So that's 40% we start with. And those were for a sort of very issues that had already lost based on propaganda, based on, modern liberalism. And that's the kind of zeitgeist out there. So it's not shocking that they lost under the circumstances. But 40% of people voted against it. And those were hardcore issues. The idea being that wasn't that 60% of people signed on to hardcore liberalism or progressive woke leftism or something like that. Those were people who were saying, well, I don't think a woman who was sexually assaulted and has a a baby with some like fatal deformity, and she, this, that, and the other, hard cases effectively, right? And she has to go to Liverpool and she's crying on the way there, and this, that, and the other, or Savita Halappanavar dies of sepsis. These kind of stories and these hard cases and these exceptions and these things were foremost on most people's minds for the abortion thing. So you could see how those passed, but even still, 40% of people voted against that. Not 4%, 40%, right? Then you go beyond that to a sort of a broader measure and a more recent measure. In 2024, we have a much less appealing sort of set, offering of liberalism. It's not two gay people, they just want to get married. How does that affect you? They love each other and they want to live together. Why not, or whatever, right? That's kind of the argument. So you can see how people might go in for that. Whereas the more recent ones were on changing the definition of a durable relationship. So expanding the family to all sorts of polycules and Islamic, polygamy potentially, and dissolving the idea of a standard type of family, right? That's a whole other story. And then there's the article in the Constitution saying that women have a right to be at home if they want to be at home to raise their children, which again is another whole other bag of tricks. But they were the referendum to remove that from the Constitution was opposed by 70%, right? And that's more relevant because one, it's more in line with the modern version, the newest frontier of liberalism, progressivism we're on, and two, it's more recent. The other referenda were sort of just after or before the culture wars that began in 2016. So that's more germane to the current moment. It was last year. And it was a more general temperature check on your view of this progressivism or whatever, if you want to call it that. It was a more sort of general pulse check on that because it wasn't about these specific kind of issues in a sense. And we all felt it at the time last year when they were that vote was happening, is that people weren't so much focused in like huge detail on the constitutional articles and all of that. They just sensed that it was this kind of woke or like the next stage up the ladder from gay marriage and abortion, like this kind of continuity that we have. And people just sensed it was a general escalation of that whole thing. And so on one side of it, you have the based or the traditional or the conservative or the former view, and the older Ireland, the one we're familiar with, the existing one, versus the new model, the new Ireland, Éire Nua, whatever, Ireland for all. It was kind of all encapsulated into those referenda, and it was rejected by 70%. On top of that, we have 70% of the country identify as Catholic, right, in recent census. Now, that's not like, people who are in mass every Sunday or hardcore believers. They're not Maria Steen. They're not devout and serious about it. But they still identify that way. They don't choose to identify as secular or something else, Buddhist or whatever. They identify as Catholic. So the idea that she's a Catholic conservative in her social views, the idea that that's kind of some killer issue doesn't really make sense at all. It's basically, it's not that weird to be a Catholic in Ireland, lo and behold, right? Despite what picture they try to paint. The other thing is, again, she nods to the immigration question. She's seen that way. If you look at the different polls in Ireland for immigration, some will ask about asylum, some will ask about economic migration. So the polls vacillate a lot, depending on how it's asked or who asked it. But generally speaking, if you take a general summation of the polls, it's about 60 to 65% of the Irish population just broadly oppose immigration as it is, mass immigration as it is, as in if they wanted more, the same, or less. 60 to 65% of people want less, right? So you're dealing with a candidate who, again, I'm using the word broadly a lot because, you have to think of these things as broad. It's a lot of it is about perception. What did people were voting for a certain perception last year in those women in the home and the durable relationships. It was about their perception of it as opposed to their precise reading of the situation. Same with gay marriage and abortion. It was about their perception of it. It's a perception of, well, if two people love each other, they should just, who cares or whatever. And in terms of perception, you have 60 to 65% of people are with her on immigration, again, broadly. 70% of people identify as Catholic. That, again, broadly, very broadly, right? But they do. And you had 70% of people voted on her side, not just her side like she believed in it. No, she championed the thing just last year, right? And it was the government who proposed that referendum. So in what world does she not just have a right to be on the ticket, but it's actually an obligation that she is in this race? It's almost like it's necessary. She's not on it, or at least someone very like her, but no better woman, might as well be her. if she's not on it, then it just doesn't make sense. How can you have Heather Humphreys, Catherine Connolly, and I can't believe I'm doing the stream and I've forgotten his name. That tells you a lot, right? I literally was Jim Gavin, right? That tells you something in itself. I've been reading about him for the past while, and I still can't remember his name. Does that tell you something about me or him? I don't know. I don't think. Maybe a dub would know who he is more intimately, but you know, the point being is they're roughly all the same, and I can get into that a bit. There are differences, but broadly speaking, they are kind of the same flavor. I mean, Catherine Connolly and Heather Humphreys. Let's just forget about the other guy for now. Two different flavors. Catherine Connolly is crunchy and this and that, and Heather Humphreys is like a standard Fine Gael boomer. But you know, you take immigration, climate change, you know, go down the list of all these cultural issues and then economic issues. I mean, what's the, you know, one says we should be more fairer and spread the love a bit and more fair and spread the love. The other says we should sort of also do that, you know. Oh no, but Catherine Connolly supports Palestine. Well, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael support Palestine too. So I just don't. Catherine Connolly's like a lefty and she supports equality. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael support equality and diversity as well. Like, you know, there really isn't actually anything there. But yeah, again, 70%, 60%, we have a majority and a clear majority. And if you want to be really like Harvey Norman, like we've gone insane, like we've slashed the prices, we've gone crazy. Let's just call it 50% and leave the other 15-20% on the table. 50% of people at the very minimum in Ireland have no representation up there. I'm talking to people all the time, normies, and they're sticking in IPAS and asylum and immigration into the conversation, and I don't actually bite because in my personal life I try to like leave it off a little bit. Do you know what I mean? I could go off like, but I choose to go, oh yeah, no, I kind of agree. But everyone's talking about it, everyone knows. And yet among Catherine Connolly, Heather Humphreys and Jim Gavin, there'll be no mention of that. It's just, oh yeah, whatever. So, you know, with Maria Steen's ousting, you kind of have nothing. It's sorry to just stumble on my words, but it's just really weird. It's just really obviously weird. People have kind of given this idea that like we're a besieged minority. There's 15% of us out there who have this view, and that's not an insignificant number, and we should be represented. Maria Steen should be up there. We're the important minority or whatever. It's like not the case at all. It really is a case of silent majority in the most literal sense of the term. Would have been represented by Maria Steen. Affable, is a qualified, professional, you know, appealing person who can handle herself on stage, handle herself politically and rhetorically and all of that. Broadly representing that side of the equation. And also, given what's happened in the last few years, the sort of rejection of woke that's gone on across the West, the immigration thing. I mean, look at all the Gardaí fracas that have happened over the last few years, with the whole country being against what's been happening. The idea that you don't have someone up on the stage who even somewhat takes that side of the story is just completely discrediting. So anyway, hello chat. I was Last Frugal is in the chat. I was listening to your stream just before. I double speeded it and kind of raced through it, and it was very interesting. A breakdown on who to vote for now that we have 3 candidates. And it was, if I'll TL the Oret, Last Frugal says Catherine Connolly. I sort of agree, but just more on how it went down. You know, the other thing is, critics will say no, it was democracy. There is a process, and senators, councils, and TDs used their democratic discretion to either vote or nominate her or not nominate her, as is their choice. That them's the rules, right? But it's just one of those common sense things. Everybody knows that's kind of bullshit. She would have been a perfectly good candidate. I've demonstrated that already. She would have represented half to 2/3 of the country, right? I think she should be on the ticket. But it's the way the circles were wagging. Wagons were circled, right? Excuse me. It's the way that happened with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael putting out their block. Their kind of hit on their TDs, telling them not to vote for her. And also, more importantly, the way that spread out to so-called independents, Michael Lowry, Noel Grealish, African spongers of infamy, Kevin Boxer Moran, like the filth from this country, the way it works, because you had Kevin Boxer Moran, this guy, this Athlone TD, who stood outside Lizzie Wallen, if I'm saying that correctly, in Athlone, the asylum centre debacle there. Every town's got one. And he, one of these cold spring evenings where they're all there with their placards and opposing it. And he joined the party and showed up. Phil Dwyer tried to interview him and he ran away scared. Bad sign to begin with. Then they put in this court injunction based on an old planning law to have the centre stopped. Then the state started writing law on the spot to actually get around it, right? Basically writing law like in the court, effectively, against the challenge, to back down a challenge against the state. The state starts rewriting the law basically in the courtroom. The judge starts changing it. Might as well be like that, right? And Kevin Boxer Moran is now like minister for the OPW, something like that. He has the power. He's in a position, at least a strong position, to attempt to have the centre blocked. It's a whole story of its own, right? Nick Delahanty did a thread on it. But he basically turncoated on them as soon as he jumped into government. Lowry is meant to be some independent in Tip. And as far as I can see, he's just Fine Gael. There's a whole history on that. But the people who vote for him, it's understood from also Grealish. Grealish was voted in on his support for Uachtarard, against the asylum imposition on them. It's very well understood what their success is based on. It's understood that they're rootin' tootin' anti them up there in Dublin, them liberals, all that. They represent a fairly conservative voter base, and they're meant to be mavericks and the rest of it. That's the narrative that they put out there to the poor people who vote for them. And they can't even nominate Maria Steen, relatively moderate, let's be real. Because one would assume they got the call, right? And that's what bothers me is even McDougall, all the rest of it, like, again, you would think he would, like, he sat alongside Maria Steen opposing the article amendments to the Constitution just last year. They were sat next to each other in the same group, doing the same thing with the same sort of general support base. Like, he comes out and says, he gives this whole, I don't know, liberal, and this, honestly, there is something about his head. They all have these heads. I don't know if any of you are with me on that. These McDougals, these Grealishes, I don't know. McDougall looks like some sort of Presbyterian judge or something from like 200 years ago, right? He's just got this somber, imposing sort of pompousness. And he has clearly been a darling of the state. Like, he is effectively deep state, let's be real, right? He gets wheeled out for every time conservative or populist backlash Ireland has an issue, he gets wheeled out. And then he sort of, that's on season. And then off season, he acts like a sort of a progressive, liberal, principled, I don't know what, like he's the keeper of the state, or he's some sort of, I don't know what it is about him, but it kind of makes me sick. He's been on the TV since I was a child, right? He's been like, I've been hearing the name Michael McDowell and seeing his face, his head for decades, and he's just this fixture. And I'm not a fan of these people who believe that they are like the political Praetorian Guard for Irish sort of post-millennium progressive liberalism and global capitalism, or whatever you call whatever this thing is, right? This monstrosity that is like devolved into where we're at. He's some sort of you know, watcher on the wall for that, and yet on the other hand can be this conservative firebrand, or at least that's how some of the lemmings perceive him. Like, people were singing his praises after the last one, and it's just kind of like that those referendums were defeated on the issue. You could have put anyone up who is competent at speaking, put them in the position to advocate for it, and they will look like they were successful, right? I mean, Maria Steen was very good. She was more effective than he was. But people are like, oh, Michael saved us or whatever. It's like, look, he just got up. He's dry enough. He got up and he just made the basic arguments. He stood there and, like, I don't know. It's just this in crowd. It's a little bit the same with Pater Tobin and all these guys. They're all right, but I'm kind of just sick of the snobbery of the whole thing, to be honest. And the way they sort of deign to use the energies of populist discontent, but then act like they're too good for everyone, in a sense, right? You saw that with Michael McDowell. I'm just talking about how she was blocked. I mean, it was effectively what can only be described as a deep state sort of what would you call a sort of a like a coup before the fact, right? Like the way the Turkish military is meant to have a role, or you'd see that, like military juntas or whatever, who like overthrow democratic governments because they're the real defenders of the state. It's like a political version of that, and I really am just kind of sick of that. It's like I say, a political elitist version of that. And what are they defending? I wouldn't mind if they were defending a real noble state, a coherent state, a nation state, but they're not. They're just defending some vague I mean, what it can really best be described as like a I mean, I would say something like a criminal cartel, or like some sort of banking landing strip for, the usual shadow banking, exploitation. Like, it's obviously not any kind of coherent state of any sort. It's basically like a financial some sort of how do I put it? Ireland is like a post-national enclave of this sort of delegitimized Western order, basically. I mean, we are one of the worst. So I don't know what they're sort of standing around in their suits, getting all pompous with their liberal credentials or whatever. Anyway, Michael McDowell, 2004, right? 21 years ago. I was 13. He champions the referendum to, I mean, it's a complicated thing, but effectively to end birthright citizenship and stop this massive bleed on immigration at the time. And he said, if we had not enacted the legislation, the opportunity for right-wing racism to enter Irish politics would have been enormous. Our system, like most systems in the Northern European political world, is wide open for people to campaigning on anti-immigration issues. So again, he has got this idea in his mind. I don't know what his real intentions and motivations are, but his statement would say that he believes the state needs to be guarded from the wishes of the majority, effectively. Which, I don't know what sort of political philosophy you need to ingest to somehow make that make sense in your mind. Do you know what I mean? Uh, like you have to be on some heavy stuff to kind of rationalize that. A 10-year-old child could tell you that that's just doesn't seem right, does it? And if you want some backup on that, an article today in the Irish Independent, Michael McDougall forgets his lectures on democracy. Okay, so the quote, the basic takeaway on this article, and I have it here, the archived, but he basically says she would have won. That's why I didn't vote for her or nominate her. Where's the exact quote? Yeah, I seem okay. It's just a big article here. I can't pick it out, but take my word for it, right? I can put the link in the chat, and I can show you the one I'm talking about for what it's worth. That article, Fionn Sheahan, Irish Independent, he effectively says, if I nominated her, she would have won or would have likely won, which is just mind-boggling to me. I mean, again, I just appeal to the basic idea. She might have won or would likely have won. So, and I'm not a huge fan, or he claims he's not a fan for some piddling reason, right? It's just like what more is there to say? That's your Michael McDougall, right? And his chief concern is to stop any sort of populist or racist, as he calls it, uprising. He said before that could have huge potential. I believe he said that if I engaged in that kind of politics, I could be extremely successful. That's how charged and electric that issue is. But of course, that would be irresponsible. Now, when did we as a country have a conversation where we would have hundreds of thousands of people coming here every year, obviously against our own best interests, where any discussion or debate on that issue is crushed before the fact? People who insist on still raising the issue are actively persecuted directly by the state. When did we have that conversation? What version of classical liberalism are you taking? Where can I sample it, right? Because I need to see what it looks like, where that can be rationalized to make any sort of highfalutin, holier than thou, guardian of democracy sense. It's just like, fuck off, basically. Just, I mean, he's old enough now, and my suggestion for Michael McDougall would just be fucking move aside, piss off. I mean, he's done now anyway. No one's going to buy it again. I felt funny about it when he was being championed by right wing, like populist people and stuff last year, because I was like, really? Like, he just gets shoved in front of the camera. He gets shoved in before a pulpit or whatever, and you, like, you know, prostrate yourself in praise of the guy. You know, you have to understand that certain people are given the mic, certain people are given the platform. It really is kind of all rigged in a sense that, like, you know, why is Keith Woods, for example, just not on TV making an argument for something, or, you know, the likes of him? And Michael McDougall is, every couple of years he's wheeled out again, and the usual suspects, right? But even so, you would think, yeah, well, even under those auspices, you would imagine that he would give Maria Steen the nod. I mean, she's almost part of that clique, isn't she? Surely she'd get it. But no, it goes that far, that the most reasonable avatar you could possibly have put forth for a broad perceived coalition of people on that right wing or populist or nationalist or conservative side of the tracks, you couldn't find a more agreeable candidate. You know, okay, we can't have Conor McGregor because he's got all his stuff. You can't have Nick Delahanty. He's young and inexperienced, and he was something like that. I don't believe so, but that could be the argument. He's new to the game. So what could be more fitting than a barrister, architect, Montessori teacher, mother of five, roasted Micheál Martin, on a referendum debate just last year, which she effectively won largely on her own merit, 70%. What more is there to say? Broadly sort of nodding to immigration, which 60 to 65% of people are against. Is a Catholic conservative. 70% of people identify in some sense as Catholic. What's the issue? You know, where's the she was divisive. She was this. She was no. She's not, right. But no. She can't go on according to McDougall, our savior. Apparently. So yeah, that was McDougall. What else did he say? Here he is versus. I'm just on a McDougall tear here. Listen to this, because Desmond Fennell, right, spiritual champion of like the Irish nationalist right wing, trying to find it. McDougall, this must be in the 80s or the.
Today on Counterpoint, I asked Declan Ganley.
That's Eddie Hobbs. That's a different question entirely. Okay, that's not it either. Damn. Tab here. It's just I saved it last night and it is not coming up for me. Bear with. I'm just going to look for it. Bear with. Desmond. Michael McDougall. Because it really shows what Michael McDougall is. Michael McDougall is a close relative, I believe, of Henry Farrell, who is this very interesting Irish American. He's kind of Americanized, liberal, like proper liberal intellectual, who is a darling of, I would say, just the US deep state, effectively. Talks about deglobalization, etc. And he's interesting, but he's a hardcore insider. And to me, that just tells you something about McDougall. Okay, that's not coming up for me, so I'll just give up on that. If anybody has a link to the Desmond Fennell, Michael McDougall clip, I just pulled up a load of tabs here and they're all like reloading, so I just don't know. But Desmond Fennell effectively said something to the effect of like, you know, Ireland is kind of being run by these institutional actors who are trying to kind of run it a certain way, you know, like a light conspiratorial take on things, but definitely accurate. And Michael McDougall sort of says, no, the pish posh, there's no such thing. The state is a very, you know, noble and transparent and fair thing. There is no such thing as a, you know, effectively a deep state or an agenda at play, which is just, you know, patently absurd. But yeah, if anyone sees that, pop it in there. Hopefully I'll see it. But anyway, what else have we got? There's been a lot of stuff. Declan Ganley, Eddie Hobbs, Pater Tobin, all talking about this. You know, there is a part of me. I mean, I'll get to that in a second. Another thing I wanted to mention was the Conor McGregor, Maria Steen sort of content, like the significance of the difference between two of them. I feel like that was relevant as well, because we had Conor McGregor and he was marred in scandal, has been most of his career, right? But especially in the last year, we have this case with Nicola Hand. We have some of the leaks and pics and whatever, all this stuff, right? He effectively got, you're at the gates with, oh, Last Brigade has the clip, thank you. Actually, like, raging, because it won't let me copy it. I have to actually go into the YouTube to get it, so. But yeah, I'll try to talk and scroll at the same time. You know, so I thought what happened to Conor McGregor was quite profound in a way, because, and it actually links to Maria Steen in funny ways, because what he got as a mix of his own actions. Someone could say, well, he brought that on himself with his actions or whatever. But, you know, there's a lot of people do a lot of things out there, nobodies or whatever. It's only if you're in the political arena, as everyone knows, but then also if you're like a dissident or whatever, then you're, you know, it's all up for grabs. But like Johnny down the road who goes to, you know, Lanzarote and ends up in some sort of or Thailand, even better, you know, whatever it may be, is never known. Tree falls in the woods, nobody hears it. But Conor McGregor is under that spotlight in a hardcore way, first just by being famous and then by taking a stand against the Irish regime on the immigration question. And, you know, they threw it all at him kind of at once. And what you had was someone being sort of turned inside out in front of the public, in front of their family, in front of their peers, whatever, being put under that sort of pressure, that kind of weight. And whatever you want to say about it, it's a kind of a weight that most people couldn't even imagine. You know, it would be, a lot of people would consider close to torture, close to physical torture, right? Or death even. Almost like a form of death. Yeah, basically it's almost like a religious thing. Like his sins were held before him, almost like he was at the pearly gates type of thing, but it was in front of the whole world. It's a fascinating phenomenon, part of the era we live in, the world we live in, social media and all of that. And ultimately, I would see it as a form of persecution, even though he was responsible for whatever, a lot of the stuff they threw at him. He probably wouldn't deny, you know, being a bowled, right? But and that was meant to sort of preclude him from the presidency. Like whatever chance he would have had, they'd go, oh well, now he's totally fucked or whatever, because we all think he's a bad guy and whatever. But then comes Maria Steen, the exact opposite, right? She is completely polished, like effectively like this flawless character, and she gets basically ousted too. So, you know, what do they want? Do you want a sinner? Do you want a saint? It doesn't matter. It's actually irrelevant. And the other reason I found the connection interesting, she has a speech from about, I think maybe 6 months ago, that she gave at some Catholic conference about the importance of the rosary in Ireland. And so I recommend checking it out at some point. It's not what you'd imagine. Like you might think she's just like saying the rosary or whatever, but she's talking about, you know, spiritual and temporal realities that we've got going on. And it's very insightful and very profound. But at one point she talks about the idea of social media and about political persecution and whatever it might be, and people's sins, people being held up basically and sort of like filleted and held up in front of the public, to be judged and to be stoned or whatever. And she takes a very, you know, naturally as a Catholic, very forgiving and sort of a benevolent attitude towards that in a way. And it just reminded me of the dichotomy between the two of those candidates. The other thing that got me about McGregor is that for all you could say about him, and I disagree, like the fact that he sort of, I feel like he's sort of on board with the Zionist crew in America, right? So I disagree with him on a lot and all of that. But I still believe that he's a fundamentally good man. He's a good person, who genuinely, for whatever flaws, when he says he has this interest in the country and these grievances about the country and he wants to run and he wants to represent and all of that, I, for the most part, just believe that that's kind of what's going on with him. That's as hard as that is to believe in the current political system with, how do I unshow? Yeah, with the cynicism and the fakeness, you know, it's like, it should be every political actor is like this, but it's actually a rare thing. Is there anyone who just runs who actually wants to do what they say they're interested in? And that's the impression I got from Maria Steen as well. I don't know her. She's probably part of a clique. I'm a bit of a class, chip on the shoulder type of person. I'm not part of her world, in a sense, and she's mixed up with all these, Gript and Ganley and Tobin and McDougall until recently and all that. And I'm just not a fan of that whole little political world. They're grand, but like not for me. And I'm skeptical about a lot of them. But the impression I got off her just subjectively is that she is probably a decent person. That's just me. I think probably her running and what she espouses is what she genuinely believes, and she just wants to represent those things to some extent. She doesn't need the money. She's got plenty of plaudits already. And the same kind of goes for McGregor as well. So I just found it interesting that you have these two very, very different people in a lot of ways, and yet they share a similar spirit in a way, right? So I just found that interesting. It's like McGregor's not good enough, but nor is Maria Steen. With her handbag question, if you're very rich and you have an expensive handbag, you're like a snob and you're a posh right winger, and right wingers are all posh, rich elitists who are in bed with the regime interest. But if you're not rich, if you're poor, or if you're like, economically or financially aggrieved by the situation, and you're looking at it from that basis, you're a scaldy, jealous, poor loser who can't keep up with the demands of liberal capitalism. And it's a generous enough game if you're in any way successful, and if you're not able to enjoy whatever spoils are there, then you're just a bitter loser, and your criticisms aren't objective, they're just based in your own personal failing, etc. It's kind of like, which one is it? All these narratives. But it's just, it's never good enough. It's always a criticism. It's always from the wrong person. And that's kind of what I'm saying. It's always from the wrong person. If you're too poor, it's because of you're poor. If you're too rich, it's because you're rich. If you're a sinner, it's because you're a sinner. If you're perfect, it's because you are too perfect. You're a Stepford wife or something like that. It's actually not about what, let's just say dick pic someone sent to someone else at some point, or whatever it is else, right? Scandal. But it's also not about the handbag. That's all just something we all need to get past. And what we need from political actors is sincerity and sort of, in a sense, fidelity to what they state, what they say they believe, and that's it. Just you're saying you're representing a certain group on certain issues, and that's what you want to do, and that's actually what you're doing. That's something that I think that's one of the dividing lines. Whereas you compare it to Micheál Martin, Michael McDougall, Lowry, Grealish, all these different people who claim to be different strands, but actually, to me, they just come across as insincere institutional actors, who maybe don't really believe anything. There's no coherent belief to be found whatsoever. It's just a sort of a power, personal expedience, something like that. It's a political game. It's a political grift, as opposed to just people with stated views, passionate, honest, earnest views, and taking them forward into like the game. I think that's one of the things we can sort of take out of it. Now, I want to play this Desmond Fennell clip because, again, Desmond Fennell being one of these such people, a real ideologue, and I don't say that in the bad way, like a person who could write and just a person who clearly wanted something good for his nation, and had his ideas well fleshed out. He actually had ideas to put forth, in a sense, compared to someone like McDougall with his whatever this liberal, watchman is, or whatever about that. Like, yeah, but what's your actual view though? How do you think like, what's your, what do they call it, Weltanschauung, worldview of how Ireland would be best ran overall, or is it just grand? It's it's the status quo mentality. Anyway, so let's have a look at this interaction. I haven't watched it in a long time, so I'm refreshing my memory here as well.
They are the people who oppose the Irish dream as it issued from the Irish Revolution, that which inspires me, that's to say, for a culturally and intellectually independent nation in all of Ireland, democratically self-governing, economically self-maintaining. The Dublin Four people are either opposed to that or indifferent to that. They have other priorities.
What
That's
are those
one way.
priorities?
Well, all right. Their other priorities would be of an individualist kind. Such as the well-known contraception, divorce, abortion thing, the rights of the individual expanded to the maximum. They're not very interested in the major affairs of the Irish nation, which is why there's been stagnation on all our major problems for 20 years.
You mean such as economics in the north?
Such as the failed economy and the north, exactly. That is why for 20 years there's been stagnation on those two issues, because the Dublin Four people have had undue influence with their agenda over what government is doing. And since the Dublin Four people are strongly represented in the media and the media influence government, that is how.
Would you put them into a class?
Well, yes, and I would like to make one thing clear, because although it's known, an awful lot of people don't seem to know it, it does not mean the Dublin Four postal district literally. It means...
I assume it also includes Dublin 6, where you live.
Yes, it's what I would call the South Dublin, a large section of the South Dublin middle class. South Dublin middle class.
Let's move along to Michael McDowell for a moment. Michael, so far, what do you think of what Des is saying?
I think it's intellectual waffle. I think there's absolutely no substance to it at all. I think it's a method whereby Desmond Fennell and John Waters in the Irish Times explain the fact that very few people agree with them, that there's a big conspiracy out there of people who push them off the media, hammer their ideas in public, and keep them out of the public eye.
You're saying it's only a personal vendetta then?
No, I mean, Des Fennell is a self-styled intellectual. Whether he is an intellectual or not is something which I don't know. But I do believe that he is somebody who is frustrated by the fact that his ideas are not shared by the vast majority of people. So just as in America, they invent the East Coast liberals as a group that just sort of say are responsible for all the woes of society, Des Fennell has, from the fastness of his intellectual ivory tower, decided that there's a group of people called South Dublin middle class who are keeping his views repressed.
Well, we're not here really to go into the business of whether Des Fennell is an intellectual or not. What about what he says about these people who live in South Dublin? Let's call it South Dublin.
Well, I mean, I mean, whether Des Fennell is intellectual or not, that's a question for which people can judge. But I don't think it's very intellectual to have to put your views in contrast to a fantasy. And he's invented this fantasy idea that there is a sort of a South Dublin middle class society, and he thinks that he is being kept down by them, and that there is an Irish dream that is being frustrated by them.
Sure that Des
but
all
Irish history proves he's wrong.
Well, let's move on for a moment to see if Noel Campbell-Sharp will agree with him.
I mean, the cut of that looking back, right? Of course, my whole screen's gone goofy here, but I mean, that's the man. Like, going all the way back to that, and here he is today, offered the most like milquetoast in a certain sense, well-groomed sort of offering of a candidate for a broad majority of what, like I've suggested, I think I've demonstrated, minimally 50% of the population, depending on your criteria, it could go all the way up to 70% if you're basing it on the referenda that she herself championed along with him just last year, and that candidate was suppressed out of a race for the presidency. Just the ability for her to run so that the public themselves could choose or not choose her to be the president, and that was blocked by him on the basis of him saying, well, if I nominate her, she might and probably will win. But there's no, and where does he live? I mean, I'm quite likely South Dublin, perhaps. So, you're coming full circle there on Michael McDowell. Do not believe people like this who run. I saw as well, like Pater Tobin, in speaking about this, how Maria Steen got blocked and how it's a disgrace and the rest of it. That's very grand. But he repeated something he said many times, which is that Ain 2, and I like some Ain 2 members and that, but and I can't read his mind exactly, but he has hinted and nodded many times at the idea of Ain2 being important, that the government should listen to what Ain2 are saying, because if they don't, his latest term he used is ne'er-do-wells, right? Or, and other times he might say a far right or an element, a dark element or some shit like this, right? That could be very popular, and if they're not listened to, then people who claim to represent them will do really well. So you should just go with us, with me, Pader Tobin being a long-time sort of political insider, in a sense like McDougall, even though they're at odds right now. Just this whole idea of these institutional gatekeepers, these political fixtures, having the right to call others ne'er-do-wells and this and that and the other. It does come back to a basic question of elitism. Yeah, he's elected TD of Navan or whatever, right? And fair play to him, he's successful. And some of them are elected, some of them are sort of brought in through other means, senators and the like. But there's just, when we're in this, what I'm getting at is this whole idea of we have populist discontent, and we have this sort of clique of people, and you could go from, and some of them are good and some of them are bad and some of them we don't know, and I'm not pointing fingers, I don't know them personally, but like, let's say John McGurk has been on telly multiple times for the pro-life thing and for this and for that, and should we ban paper straws or not, or you name it, he's kind of on TV and he's the guy. And it's just one of those things. It's like, well, like, why is he on a discussion panel or whatever? And I'll use him again because he's a perfect example, and not, let's say, Keith Woods. Keith Woods is extremely professional and intelligent and all that. There's this kind of question, and it's generational and it's institutional as well, of like, why is that the case? And what's remarkable here is that someone who is within that clique themselves was blocked, because I believe at the end of the day, Maria Steen probably is sincere, and much like, not to compare her to Saddam Hussein, but you see with these US statecraft or whatever in foreign countries, when they will nominate some strongman to oppose a neighboring country or whatever it is, and what will happen is that strong man or that person, that installed puppet, will get notions and basically go, do you know what, I actually like my country, I'm going to sort of claim sovereignty now and actually start running it a certain way. Who else? Putin was like that. He was a liberal darling for a while, of the sort of post-shock therapy era in Russia. And look where we are now, right? He actually became a sovereign leader and started to pull the socks up a little bit. Orban himself, say, he's another story, but he was kind of similar. Say what you want about Saddam, Putin, or Orban, and they don't quite relate to Maria Steen directly, but the concept of, well, what if someone is part of the clique and they're sort of green-lit and they're sort of good, but they happen to be one of the more sincere ones, unlike someone like McDougall, a safe pair of hands. Perhaps she has the sin. Conor McGregor has his dick pics and the rest of it, right? But perhaps her sin, from the regime's point of view, is that she has some sincerity and some decency, and that's something that they are extremely wary of. It doesn't matter what the person's stated views are, because they know that those views could change according to the person's view of reality. Over time, you might start to notice something. So it almost doesn't matter whether the person is left, right, or anything else. It's that if that person isn't a vetted Petri dish insider like Micheál Martin or Simon Harris, they're not going to observe reality and go, this is wrong, we shouldn't do this. I'm actually going to use the position I'm in to speak up against it or change it. They're not going to, because they are good. They are vetted. I mean, they are definitely part of the club, and they don't have an inner, honest, genuine compass inside them to be found. So they're grand. And someone who maybe does have that, let's just call it sincerity, is dangerous. And maybe even though she's a barrister and she's part of the Iona or was, and all of that, she's just a little bit too sincere, and maybe that's what the issue was, and that's why people like McDougall had to pull the handbrake on her. and the rest of them, Lowry, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, the whole lot of them, that you cannot have someone like that get inside the gates. So it's a mix of perhaps the sincerity of the character of the individual and also what they represent. They could perhaps have someone who is a avatar for broad right-wing populist discontent if that person was guaranteed to be a snake in the grass. If they're a guaranteed snake in the grass who can be reined in or brought in and when needed, then there may be, but it's that combination of representing that silent majority and perhaps being sincere is a dangerous thing. And that's, I would say, the distinction between someone like McDougall and someone like perhaps Maria Steen. I've just tons of notes and stuff here and tabs. I don't want to go on and on, but let me see. I'll just, do you know what? I'm actually going to finish up shortly. I can talk about this some other time, but like all of this, but for now, I mean, well, I mean, the handbag. Yeah, I provoked a handbag question recently. Let's just move this all the way over here. Yeah, there. There's this. I'll just go to this question of the right wing thing. Like, you have the people speaking out about this now are like John McGurk, like Declan Ganley, Eddie Hobbs, and all these guys, and they're grand and all. And Eddie Hobbs has been good. He's been actually quite. He's had Keith on. He's had Michael McCarthy on, and that's good. But I just feel like Maria Steen, for anyone who is remaining, who is a sincere actor, including, I would say, she herself, should understand that this discussion of like have this idea that everyone needs to be a barrister and everyone needs to be squeaky clean and everyone needs to be in accordance with regime doctrine. Like, you can never have said something that could be deemed racist or this or that. The filth outside the gates type of thing. That is just a big lie. And, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael might be pulling up the drawbridges and becoming like, they look paranoid. I mean, this has exposed them. But the question is on the, let's call it the right, are we going to be like that too, as a sort of a movement or whatever? Are we going to have it so that you have to be some institutional actor effectively criticizing the mainstream regime while performing the same process really within your own camp? I know you can't have absolute nutcases or whatever, yes. And I spoke about this in my last stream as well. There is a question of, yeah, some people are crazy and sometimes you need to draw a line maybe, but there's a lot of schizos out there. But realistically, that's not what you see with the, the McDougals and even the Steens and all these kind of Ronan Mullen and the rest of them. This kind of clique thing. I don't think that should exist within our ecosystem either, because they're constantly fighting each other to be the most. A lot of them are the most apologetic and the most in accordance with the regime. But look what happens when Maria Steen goes up. She gets blackballed anyway. And if she gets blackballed, then we might as well give up on that whole game entirely, shouldn't we? And just be an open house as within reason. That's just something I would suggest. The other thing is that Maria Steen and someone like Leisha de Bruin as well, I was impressed that she did this on her Tucker Carlson interview in regard to the recent referenda last year, that she stressed on the question of women in the home and all of that. She pressed the idea of liberal capitalism effectively being an attack on modern women, that it's actually not a bunch of rosary bead Catholics, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's not just this traditional view of Catholicism or something like a niche religious view that we should be looking at this from. You can actually look at it through sort of a leftist modern lens on how some of this liberalism is fucking things up for us all, even in the secular leftist right-on world. There's another way of looking at what could be seen as traditional values as compared to liberal capitalism. And Maria Steen talked about that too, again, with the mother in the home stuff. She spoke about tax harmonization in the early 2000s, and that's how it became impossible for people to have single income family structures and the rest of it. And there's a huge conversation to be had from that kind of technical, socioeconomic, almost leftist, socialist almost point of view. And I think that needs to be pressed more. I think that Maria Steen could press that more. People like her could press it more. And the problem is that, and this is the rub I always talk about, is that you have someone like Ganley, and I won't cast aspersions, but was involved in Russian forestry in the, I believe, early 90s. Albanian, I think it was Albanian, other stuff in the late 90s, and Iraqi telecommunications in 2003, and recently appointed Mike Pompeo to the board of his Outernet global telecommunications company, Rivada, is intimately connected to what you could describe as the US Deep State Department sort of royalty, CIA royalty. And you can say that's just business and it doesn't mean anything more and the rest of it, but he is in that world. He is, I don't know if he would accept the term Zionist, but he's pro-Israel. He's anti-China, anti-Russia. Effectively, I mean, some people might say neocon. I don't know if he would accept that term, but he's of that ilk, and he's business-wise connected to it and has a long history with it. And maybe other people say, no, he's cool, and you don't know, but McGurk, had a Rivada email until a few years ago, right? Even when he was doing Gript. You have David Quinn, Catholic advocate, I believe, but like a hardcore Zionist, describes himself as a friend of Israel. And you have Ian O'Doherty, doing a podcast with Michael Murphy of The Telegraph, who is connecting immigration grievances in Ireland to pro-Israel sentiment, effectively, or at least anti-pro-Palestinian sentiment. And all of this going on kind of at the same time, sort of in that institutional seat of representation for the right wing, this kind of clique. They're crowing about Maria Steen now, and I agree with them on that. And yet, I do believe this kind of shift to a sort of left, a sort of broadening of the appeal for someone like Maria Steen could be hugely powerful, and yet it's hamstrung by this US affiliated Atlanticist Zionist thing. It doesn't actually naturally, organically have any home. It sort of hamstrings the ability to appeal to the left where possible and to look legitimate, particularly among the youth, and come across as legitimate and sovereign and independent. And that's sort of a problem. And that comes back to the same idea of this clique, where on one hand, it's pulling up the drawbridge for independent actors, in a lot of cases, people who are out there, but they're not part of the clique. And then on the other hand, the clique seems to have this sort of structural commitment to the likes of Zionism, the likes of Atlanticism. And I don't know if anyone really chose that. If the masses really chose that, we see that 50% of AFD voters believe Israel is committing a genocide, right? But yet right-wing media and spokespeople will act like we're all pro-Zionist, right? And there's that disconnect. You have the kind of Orban world, everything from like the Polish thing. I saw and it's not to point fingers, whatever, but I saw certain people are kind of picked out. It's the question of high versus low human capital, are picked out to go to, let's say, these mega conferences around Europe. And of course, that is connected back to the US deep state and the Zionist thing. Let's be real. And they will pick some high human capital and, you know, fly you out and bring you along, and you get to meet all the famous people. And that is effectively a form of grooming, and it's all well and good. But it steers the conversation as it's designed to do. It steers influence. And so does the Orban thing, the Yoram Hazoni, Orban, you know, mega, whatever you want to call it thing. There are all these influences there. And that comes back to the problem of cliques and influence and gratification and all the rest of it coming from on high. So that's why I feel like this discussion of human capital, high human capital, and keeping the schizos out, and it's true, it does need to be done, but there's two sides to the story as well, right? You have this institutional choke point issue is not always a good thing. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's fraught and it's difficult. And I mean, how that relates to Maria Steen, I suppose, you know, you could say she's sort of part of that. She's in that world. I don't know where she stands exactly on all this stuff, but she would be better off. She still got blocked either way, but someone like her, insofar as they ever have a chance of kind of climbing in again to the race or the running, they would be much better off taking a different approach, you know, and not being bogged down in this perpetual kind of right-wing talking head shop that is sort of connected to the regime through the likes of Michael McDowell, a foot in both camps type of situation. I don't know. I'm just kind of putting out thoughts there, kind of on the spot. You know, how does it all come together? I think it kind of does. I hope you kind of see where I'm coming from. And a lot of those people are good, you know, Gript and McGurk and lots of others. It can be good. Pater Tobin says good things, but it's when Pater Tobin says something like, well, our job is to keep all of them out, and our job is to actually define and frame the discourse and sort of harness and control it. I just kind of go, are you like, okay, you know, can we not have a broader discussion of what the terms are? Who says that it should be this way, and who says who the ne'er-do-wells are and who isn't, and which views are legitimate? Like, we need to have a conversation about immigration. Okay, well, what's the conversation? And that brings me to one other key point I want to make as well about Maria Steen and her ousting from this race, right? Which it was. It was a form of political assassination, effectively, to keep her out. But when you think about it, the fact that over a majority of people would be sort of broadly represented by her, just think about this. If you had a race of about 7 people, I think that'd be legit. We have a very diverse cultural conversation at the moment, a lot of stuff happening. So, there, you know, you should have someone who's all about climate change. You should have maybe 2 or 3 Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael gone beans. You should have a Catherine Connolly type. You should have this. But if you were adding up your 5 or 6, I'd say you should probably have 2 at least. If there was, let's say, a field of 7, just on purely an alien looking down objectively, you should have 2, at least 2 sort of right-wing flavors in that. And if Maria Steen is going to be the broad candidate, the respectable, the moderate, the vague, the institutional, then you should probably also have had someone to her right. Because if 60, potentially plus % of people could be the Maria Steen crowd, you could probably have 20% of the population would be more hardcore, which is not a negligible figure. 20% of people would say, remigration now, get them fucking out. We've had enough, they should be sent back, this, that, and the other. There's a lot of people are way more out there than Maria Steen, right? And I think it would be not good enough if it was just Maria Steen. If we were looking at it objectively, it's if she says, well, I'm actually a modern Irish person too, and no offense to her, but like, she's trying to keep the powder dry, I'm modern. I just have some Christian beliefs, and I just think we need to have cool the jets and have a more open discourse. And some people don't feel represented on immigration. That's very mild to just say some people out there feel they're not represented. Well, who are those people? Where is their representative who actually just says what it is, as opposed to like hints at it, right? So you should probably have a candidate up there who is more hardcore. You could say Conor McGregor. Is he too scandal ridden? Fine. Make it Keith Woods. Make it this. Make it that. Name your flavor. Keith Woods was at the re-migration conference and the rest of it, right? Like, he's an advocate for that. He's straight up. So you could choose your personality, but there should be someone up there who is just straight up given the immigration argument. Straight up. Someone who's already a bit cancelled. They're not mealy-mouthed about it. That person, objectively, population-wise, if you were designing a democracy and saying, our job is to get a selection of candidates up there through whatever process who best represent the different, factions or beliefs that are out there that are high on the zeitgeist in the country, different interests and stuff. I would, as much as I hate the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, gone bean boomer world, I wouldn't deny that there's a lot of people out there who believe or their own interests are aligned with that. They should be up there, 2 or 3 of them up there. Should be a couple of lefties, a couple of this, but there should definitely be not just Maria Steen. There should be at least 2. And the other one would be more hardcore than Maria Steen. She can play it cool. She can give the broad one. But then the other person just goes immigration, immigration, immigration. And they're not mealy-mouthed about it. They're not afraid of, being cancelled. We've had enough protests, enough online discourse about this. You talk to people behind closed doors, they say, this fucking stuff needs to stop. La, 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 la. Send them back. That person should be there too. And if you just think about the impact that would have on the debate, right? So what we currently have is Jim Gavin, Catherine Connolly, and Heather Humphreys. What's there to even disagree on, right? Really. You introduce Maria Steen, the whole thing changes because she's bringing whatever into it. She might name drop immigration a bit. Now they can't just consider immigration a consensus. It's actually a point of discussion. But what if you had your Keith Woods or your Conor McGregor, whoever, someone who's more hardcore, to her right? Think of how it would change then. Suddenly she has to adjust, right? Because she can be as respectable. Oh, I'm the respectable one. I'm like in the Michael McDowell gripped world or whatever it is. I'm just trying to keep all the ne'er-do-wells out a little bit, maybe. I'm just trying to kind of say that there's vaguely some unheard people out there. No, that's not going to be good enough for her at all, because her lunch is being stolen by the person who's just saying, here, these are the numbers. We're a country. We have a right as a nation state to not become a minority. These people are being shipped in overnight. We can't get houses, all the usual, right? Suddenly, they can go, Maria, is this the case or is it not? Kind of thing. And then Maria turns to Heather Humphreys and goes, what do you think? And the whole kind of Overton window is absolutely smashed. Absolutely smashed. And because people see it as officialdom, this is the presidential debate, this is the discourse, it has such a huge impact. And ultimately, chances are, the winner would end up being either Steen or the other. Probably would be Steen, because she would end up being the middle ground, right? Effectively, maybe the hardcore one could be framed as a bit too much, but Heather Humphreys and Catherine Connolly would just sound like lunatics. Catherine Connolly, oh well, what do you think about immigration? Blah, 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 blah. They would just become actually irrelevant. Like irrelevant. The debate would be all over this way. And they just couldn't allow that to happen. They couldn't even allow it to happen with just Maria Steen. That's how fragile their sort of form of control is at this point. They have to be completely exclusive. You have a debate between 3 people who basically just agree on everything. So that's why I say Potemkin democracy. Whatever you want to say about all these other issues and little threads to pull at, we are living in a system that is objectively less democratic than like China, right? China has its own way of doing things as well, their own version of a democracy, public representation, and to raise public issues with cantons or communities or whatever. There's not a system in the world that doesn't claim to have some sort of public representation system, rule set, but ours is, and they're all somewhat fake and they're all somewhat made up and not real. But at least in China, on the important questions, they are kind of represented, whereas we're not. I mean, we have a debate where 70% of the population, arguably, are not represented. Imagine that. A debate between three people on TV where arguably 70% of the population are not represented. Catherine Connolly, I believe, voted no on those constitutional changes as well, but she's not really a representative of that conservative anti-woke point of view, let's call it. So it's just a farce, you know. And so there's a question of like, where are we within our system politically, and then the question of within right-wing populist discontent, whatever you want to call it, who represents how, which media represents how, who is legitimate, who is a ne'er-do-well, who is high human capital, what does that mean, what institutional forces are at play. You know, we're so far from, like, we have effectively won the discourse in the country. I mean, it's reality just speaks for itself. And yet we have all these layers right down the chain of institutional exclusiveness and control that keep us so far from not only having public representatives through these shutouts like we saw with Steen. And if it's true for her, it's 100 times true for me or for you or anyone else. And then even within this right-wing ecosystem, they're all talking about keeping the filth out or whatever as well, this kind of conversation, keeping the people with this dangerous rhetoric, and they're kind of doing it too in a way. And they themselves are being kept out. So like, where does someone who's just looking around going, holy shit, like, why all these games? Can we not just have public discourse, public representation, just without all of this hand-wringing? You know what I mean? Why can't we? And the fact is, if all these layers of institutional gates were taken down and the public just got to have candidates, a broad selection of candidates that represent all strands of the population, and the discourse happens in front of them, and it appears to be sanctioned by the fact that it's on the telly or whatever the consciousness thing is, then the whole thing is smashed. I mean, Heather Humphreys becomes a marginal candidate at that point because people will just look at it. Like, I do believe Maria Steen would have won. The boomers would love her. If they got a look at her a couple of times and a listen to her, in effect, what Maria Steen is what Mary McAleese presented as. They would all have to cross and say, oh, I love my wee mass on Sunday and my faith is so important to me and all this. Like, they'd play the game. But then they're just liberal capitalists, like, in the sheets. Whereas Maria Steen is kind of like, she says she's that, she is that. She has a deep view on that. Listen to her discourse online or whatever, find it on YouTube. She's the real deal on that stuff. And she's got the look, she's got the talk, and she follows through on all that. I think with a couple of debates, I think she would have, as one of the commenters here says, she would have walked in laughing my ass off, or what, in my opinion. I agree. It's very likely she would have won, and if she didn't win, she would have stolen so much of Heather because Humphreys is going, oh, here I am with me wee grandchildren and all this, so we're, you know, playing it to the boomers. Maria Steen would have had the populist, right-wing, anti-woke discontent crowd, a lot of Catholics, straight up Catholics, and then a lot of boomers, because boomers love the look and the this and the that, and the professionalism and all the rest of it. And then she would have trounced the other three in the debate. Connolly would be goosed because she could just hold all the woke stuff against her. She could just hold the state of the country against Humphreys. Your man Gavin, say no more. I think it's highly likely she would have won, and she was excluded because of the fact that she might have won. It's nuts. So I don't know, am I just giving out at this point? I'll see if there's any other note I'm forgetting. No, you know, I just take notes. And spoil the vote. Yeah, I don't know about spoil the vote. I'm torn between spoil the vote and vote for Catherine Connolly. last True Gael kind of twisted my arm there a little bit. Catherine Connolly did vote against fax passports. She voted against hate speech laws. And what was the other one? If he's still there, he could remind us. There was another one as well. Hate speech laws, vax pass, something else we would all agree with. She was on the right side of that. And she also is anti-NATO. She's pro-neutrality, and she is pro-Palestine. And anti-US imperialism. Oh yeah, the 2024 referendum is the other one. Thank you, LTG. But those carry a lot of weight versus a Humphreys, who are on the other side of a lot of those questions. So, I wonder. I think the spoil the vote thing will need to be studied. What exactly are the consequences of that? Because if it's coming from someone like Ganley, he might be cool and all that, but I think it's fair to say, with a lot of his connections and a lot of the connections to this right-wing populist institutional machine in Ireland, I would be cautious about running into the spoil the vote thing. Put it that way. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's we're had enough. We're not going to take it anymore. Maybe that's good, but someone says Connolly's pro open border, so that's a no for me regardless. I know I'm not saying to vote for her. I'm just saying it's something I'd be considering. Is that, do I want basically, if spoil the vote was whatever, then I'd say spoil the vote, right? Maria Steen, great. But if that strategically gives Humphreys the win, then I don't know, do I want to follow that? That kind of way. It's not that I like Catherine Connolly, it's that I like her more than the other two. If she's pro open borders, so are the other two. They're all pro open borders, they're all pro this, that, and the other. But the others are effectively pro NATO, pro, ending neutrality, the rest of it, introducing the latest vax passports, this, that, and the other. And Connolly has form in rejecting some of those things. So it's not a question of Connolly being great, it's her being less bad than the others. And the fact that Maria Steen, whether we like it or not, is not in the race. Do I want to voice my discontent in a spoiled vote and put the candidate that I like less than the other one, or dislike more? Do I want, because that's the actual effect. There's the spirit of the thing, and then there's the actual effect, and you have to think about that. So I don't know. I think it would have been better if Steen was on, but I don't know. It's just one, it's kind of a drawing board moment, because it's like, okay, if she can't get on, then nobody can get on, in a way. And they have just pulled up the drawbridge, circled the wagons, whatever analogy you want to use, metaphor. So it's kind of like, just what are we doing here? I suppose it's just allow them to discredit themselves. I had another thought recently, was that maybe it's better if Heather Humphreys does win, because she is the most discrediting victor possible. And if we're not involved, even via the likes of the vehicle of a Maria Steen, then if the only game in town, in a sense, is letting the regime just completely delegitimize itself and show people, younger people, outsiders, left and right, that the whole thing is just totally discredited and the ultimate enemy, as opposed to maybe each other so much, then Humphreys winning performs that role better than the others. And Connolly winning doesn't actually achieve much, really. So it's kind of like, it doesn't really matter in a way. There's an argument, there's a strategic argument for Humphreys actually winning, because it's just like, okay, so the orange boomer regime, just kind of like ventriloquist dummy, won the boomer in a rigged race, and that's what we have. We have Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael government with independents who are effectively Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael as well, and we have a Fine Gael president and that's against the wishes of like the majority of the country, and it was done through a political sort of like political assassination, by which I mean assassinated politically, of Maria Steen. And then the Catherine Connolly fans, the younger people and all of that, the lefties, they also feel disenfranchised and robbed in a certain way. They feel like the media blackballed her and called her this and that, and it creates a greater atmosphere of discontent in a way. I don't know. I don't know. I do not know. So yeah, anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I just wanted to talk about the Steen thing. And her handbag, yeah. Janie Mac. Talk about a distraction. It's a pity the scaldy lefties took the regime up on that, decided to start talking about that. It's just kind of nuts. But then she came out today and said, I intentionally wore the handbag to thumb my nose at the left who just hate rich people. I don't know if that's a good way of putting it, to be honest. I wore it just to piss some people off because I'm rich and, they just hate rich people. I don't know. It's like, I think it'd be better just to wear the handbag and say the criticism is silly, but not actually like do that with it. But anyway, because a lot of people, let's just face it, are struggling across the country, and it's not that there's something wrong with being rich. I in fact put out a tweet defending her and all that, but to a certain extent there's some truth to it, right, as well. To the someone there, Orange Tea, sorry, I can't read your name there, but agrees with me. Yeah, it's a bad response. Should have said nothing. If she just said nothing, I'd say like, hey, she has a cool handbag or whatever, fancy handbag. She's rich, she's successful, she's been a barrister, her husband's a barrister, whatever. She's just dressing well for the occasion. It's an investment piece. They say the things gain value. You could say whatever. So if you said nothing, all those things could stand up as kind of arguments. But if you come out and actually go, no, I was thumbing my nose, actually, it's kind of like, oh, seriously, just come on, like. So I don't know. I didn't love that either. But yeah, so that's the Potemkin democracy and Maria Steen's handbag. Anyway, that's the latest saga. So we'll see what happens next. Super chats, just a handful there. Imperator Scatorum gives 249 and says shekel. Is that the the conversion rate for shekels at the moment? Yeah, I haven't checked it. 249 is worth 1 Israeli shekel. Thank you, appreciate it. Lockery 5 says consolidation of power by the anti-Irish status quo, merely branch managers for Westminster and Brussels, reducing us to a failing partitioned rump state. Yeah, it's such a disaster. The North as well, like apparently most of the asylum spoofers are coming through the North. How do you solve that one? But yeah, it's weird. It's like we're stateless people, compared to China, compared to Russia, compared to Iran. These are all meant to be the bad guys, by the way. Even compared to countries that are sort of accidentally sovereign, the likes of what is it, like the steppe countries or whatever you want to call them? Are they? I'm forgetting the regional name for them, but like, your Turkmenistans and all that. These different Tajikistans or whoever, a lot of like little mini countries around there, that we don't know much about. And then you have the likes of Nepal. Nepal's a distinct at the moment, but Bhutan is one I always look at. I see Bhutan as probably sovereign because it's a buffer state between India and China. And for long periods of time, it's probably agreed by the big powers around them that we will let them effectively be a sovereign little nothing country. So Bhutan has this weird kingdom. And it doesn't seem to be affected by globalism. It runs its own thing. Like it really is like its own place. And it gets to exist within these two large powers, unaffected by American involvement or anything else, because it's the impression I get is that it's an agreement between bigger powers that we actually need countries in between us So let's just let them be whatever it is they want to be, so long as, you know, basically we want them to actually be independent and sovereign, and not you and not us, you know. So you have some sovereign countries there by accident, and Central Asia is the term I was looking for. Some of those other countries too. And then you have the ones that are sovereign by will, the likes of Russia, China, and Iran. But then on like basically the opposite end of the spectrum, you have something like Ireland, a great country to do business, an open democracy, and all of that, where there is no semblance, whether it's through this political system, the media, the policy that just gets enacted is just off, like another universe from what everybody wants and what our interests are. And there seems to be like no mechanism to influence or change it, you know. And we're at the behest of these bigger powers around us, whether it's Brussels, Frankfurt, London, Wall Street, the sort of NATO alliance, all of that stuff kind of preying around. We're just right in the middle of that. Like, we're the most anti-sovereign country, arguably, on the planet. And we find ourselves as citizens, as native citizens of that territory, that polity. I don't think it even is such a thing as a polity. It's just strange. It's like, what do you say about being a subject person? Let's not say citizen or native. A subject person, formerly native citizen of that entity, formerly nation state, formerly within living memory of a 34-year-old. That's me. That's a very dramatic and peculiar situation for a human being to find themselves in. You know, I don't know, does it have huge historical parallel to be drawn against, to be honest? But yeah, thank you for the chat. 5 from Finola, a regular. Sometimes I'm like, is Fiona my aunt or something? Like giving me, you know, being nice to me or something like that. But thank you anyway, Finola. I'll assume you're, you know, just a regular contributor. Thank you. And oh, there's one more there. James, to 28-year-old Limerick, never be able to own a home? Question mark. I don't know. Probably not, but that's a good question, James. Will you ever be able to own a home? I'd need to know what your situation is. You know, it depends where you're at. The one of the, like, there's, in terms of owning a home, whether you're 28 or younger, there's the whole question of like, should you, when you're 18, just like knock up your missus or your old doll? She goes on the single mother thing, gets a gaff, and then you move into it afterwards, and you basically hire a solicitor or something, and you sit down and you go, I'm not just going to like casually play the system. What do I need to be? Do I need to be this? Do I need to be sick? Do I need to be single? Do I need to be working, not working? Well, like, you give me the most juicing it plan possible within the law, slightly within the law, to just gain every state advantage I possibly can, and I will live my life according to that. Like, I will follow from that plan in a very intentional, technical way. If the question is that otherwise you risk being homeless and without effective access to healthcare and the rest of it, even though you might be working, that's not an unreasonable approach to take if you're starting out. I'm not saying I recommend it. I'm just saying it's understandable. But then for people who are not doing that, and people who are going to try, for someone who's like not already got their house or slightly older, like I just about sort of made it, right? You could say. But if you're, you know, whatever, 25, 24, 28, you're not there yet, and it's just getting worse and worse. The property prices are climbing every year still. I don't know how that's still possible, but anyway, immigration and no supply, I suppose. But and then the cost of everything else going up as well at the same time. It's like, if I were talking to like a 20-year-old and he wasn't taking the dole route, the dole maxing route, I'd be just saying, you have to live your life. If you're not going to a solicitor and getting the best dole plan, then you better be getting the best independent plan, as in not just saying, oh, I'll just kind of work this job and kind of do this and kind of do that. Like if you're going it alone, like without the state from a young age, you better be, you know, in the top 5-10% of people, just probably to like get a house, a reasonable house. Basically it's like the middle class normal expectation is dead in the water. Like it's basically like gladiator Colosseum type of stuff. Just to get out alive, you would have to be doing quite well, and you have to meet the right person with the same income or the similar income and the right same interests, and that has to work out, and these jobs have to work out, and your rent situation in the meantime has to work out, or you have a place you can stay with your parents, or like you have to really, it all has to lock into place fairly well, and you have to do quite well. And you have to not have any kind of health issue along the way, or some sort of issue, or you know, whatever it might be, some sort of stumbling block for you to even have kind of a chance in a way. And I don't mean to sound grim, but it's like that, those kind of are the stakes for if you're like a, I don't know, 23-year-old now saying, okay, my plan is within the next 7 years to be approaching home ownership. You know, it's a fraught game, like very, very fraught game, and there's no good answer really. But you have to try, I suppose. It's basically two things. Yeah, you have to try in that like difficult arena of just trying to secure a house yourself, or you have to play the game with the state, and that involves work too. I mean, figuring it out, going through it, doing it. But either way, you have to fight. Either way, you're going to have to fight tooth and nail to just have a reasonably normal, humble house. Have your head above water, survive, have food, have, you know, anything basically. I mean, that sounds depressing. People say that to me sometimes, but it's like, it's not depressing that I'm saying it. The reality is depressing. I'm just saying how it is. Like what I would, or even younger, let's just say 18. If I were talking to an 18-year-old now, he said, what do you, I mean, I'm no great advisor, like, but just if I were asked, I'd be saying, and this wouldn't have been true 20 years ago, you could say people had time and stuff and opportunity, but now I'd be saying, whatever route you take, you have to take this, i.e. your life, extremely seriously to even be in with a shot. To even be in with a shot. And by a shot, I mean of just having a life, like what could be at all described as in some sort of life of your own. You have to be taking it extremely seriously. You have to be on whatever your A game is, you have to be on it. And you have to play everything really, really, really smart on a daily and monthly, annually basis with a long-term view to something, to what you're trying to go for, as opposed to the casual, oh, I'm 18 or I'm 21 or, you know, no. You're already, just by being in this system now, so far behind that there can be none of that. It has to be dead serious. And it is a case of survival. And the thing is as well, you go from 20 to 30 to 30, 40, whatever, very quickly. It's a cliche for an older person to say that, but it's like, you know, you just do. So it's like, it's not a tomorrow thing, it's a now thing. It really is a now thing. And that would probably apply to like 15-year-old, any age. It's like, just to survive, you better be taking it deadly serious, to be honest. Unless you've rich parents or whatever, that's a different story, I suppose. But that's just how I see it. I think that's just what the reality is. I think another one's come in there. James Bond. Always nice for James Bond to join us. Good evening, Finola. I love listening to Garrod. Limerick is my lady through, and Jesus is my Limerick is my lady though, and Jesus is my king. No bother. I can't disagree with any of that. Limerick train station area though, sort that out, okay? Because I'm not coming back until that place rough, right? go to Limerick train station, walk to the milk market, come back and tell me what you see. Ooh. But overall, a grand city. And then Orange T3 AM. Thank you, by the way, for the last one. Orange T3 AM gives 10 and says the regime could have stolen right-wing energy through Maria and make the likes of us become integrated like MAGA and Reform to drain dissident energy. They may not be as shrewd or competent to do that, though. See, that's the thing, is that's what I sort of worried about it. Not worried, because I think Maria Steen's sincere, you know, I don't want to go around being paranoid, but I thought, well, like, whether it's Maria Steen or it's someone else, they're going to put someone in who's a sort of safe pair of hands, whether they're sincere or not, just someone who's going to moderate and sort of assimilate, but they'll carry the energy and satisfy the base a little bit and, you know, go nowhere. I mean, in a way, that's the worst case scenario, to be honest, in a sense. You go, yeah, no, they could control it. Like, if I were in their shoes, like, I agree with you. You would do that. That would be a sensible thing to do, a crafty thing to do, to let someone through the gates a little bit in some way. But they couldn't even do that. And it's not to say Maria Steen's compromised or something like that. She might be sincere, but they might say, well, she's friends with all that crew, or seems to be affiliated with the Tobins and the this and the that. She'll keep the so-called ne'er-do-wells out, and she'll keep the discourse very respectable, and in order to stay on the right side of the media, and because she's got so much, or the media, and because she's got so much sort of, she's got the baggage of the gay marriage. They'll always call it homophobic and sexist or whatever it is. She'll be trying to plead her innocence on that so much that she will just become like a respectable, dignified, sort of low-key conservative, but just a general figurehead president. And the base will be satisfied that we won. It goes nowhere. But they couldn't even let that happen, because I just believe, I think the pressure and the incestuousness of the situation at this point, is too brittle. It's so brittle now that it really cannot withstand any broadened discourse, or not very much at all. And it can't handle someone who might be a bit sincere. And she is very talented. She probably would hybridize, basically take the Christian moral values and the populist, maybe right-wing discontent on questions like immigration, and be able to synthesize a very good narrative to kind of not only satisfy people like me or you, but to almost have, you know, boomers, lefties kind of going, whoa, you know, I'd never thought of it like that, when put by someone like her, with the look and the sound and the talk and the intelligence, the intellect. You know, she might just be dangerous. Little bits of rhetoric and all that, because at the end of the day, the situation is really, really bad out there, especially for like the under 40s or whatever. It's so bad. I think it's so fragile and so brittle that it's gotten into this bunker mentality. They really can't even handle a sort of a moderate concession at all. I do believe that's the case, to be honest. And they're just pushing and pushing and pushing now. And so in a way, it's kind of a good thing. I suppose it just exposes them. The one last, thank you for your chat there. The one other thing I'd say that struck me with this was, last thought, is the whole lefty thing, or whatever it is, liberal thing of like, oh, you want to take us back to the 80s, you want to take us back to this, and you're just a pearl clutching religious person, or you're hearkening back to some old way. It really rings hollow to me. Like, up until quite recently, maybe before the post-COVID time, let's just not count COVID, that was a whole other thing. Let's say pre-2020 or pre-2022, whatever way you want to look at it. And certainly back to the mid-2010s, and then before that, all the way back to decades previously. The general idea of modern Ireland, modern world, liberal abundance, liberal capitalist abundance, and freedom, and throwing off the shackles of the past and of structures of society and all the rest of it. And with that comes good times and the rest of it. That stood up until very recently. And there's just something about this time in particular, all centering around Steen, you know, she kind of embodies that discourse a bit. The idea of like a bull ring, like Yas Queen or whatever, of like 28 years old, like spitting that one out again, that old line is just kind of surreal, to be honest, because you go, we're totally, sorry for my language, but we're totally bollocksed. We're totally fucked. It is off the wall bad out there. People can barely pay for their groceries. Whatever the latest statistic is, fucking 80%, 90% of people under 30 or something don't have a house and probably never will. You know, you're approaching Dickensian levels of sort of effectively poverty. Like a way of looking at it is, let's say this 75% of people under the age of 32 or whatever live in their parents' house, right? If you wanted to see what the level of poverty this generation is actually on, what you would do is take all those people, many of whom work, they earn a median salary is like 40 something grand. But a lot of people, if you skew that for age under, because a lot of those people are 60, they're on big wages or whatever. If you skew it for under 33 or something, you know, that'll actually be lower. And there's also people who are under the median, but they still work a half decent job or whatever. If you were to take all those people living in their box room that they grew up in, and you were to say, what you're going to do is buy any property that you can afford. So you save up whatever deposit you can afford in the next couple of years, you're just going to jump right in. You're just going to buy what you can buy. And that's it. Being in your mammy's bedroom or your mammy's house until you're 35 or whatever just isn't an option. You're going to just dive in. You're going to just dive in the cold water. And you're going to get whatever house you can get. People would literally be living in Dickensian conditions. The only reason we don't see the level of, and they would be starving, literally starving, right, at the same time. They would be living in houses that don't have electricity, that barely have water, where the roof is half gone, it's in the middle of nowhere, they're freezing, literally freezing to death. If they had children, the children would probably be dying of exposure and hunger, stuff like that. Like, that's kind of the reality. The fact that you have this kind of layover of people like stunting back to the former generation living on their fumes, which are limited, then you would see straight up where we're at. So it's really, really bad out there. And to compare that to the 1970s or something, oh, when we went to mass and when this and that and gay marriage wasn't there, and say, oh, how dare you want to take us back to that or something. It's just preposterous, you know. It's like, I think that horse is well and truly dead, lads. Like, whatever you want to say about socially conservative values or whatever, the perch from which you're throwing stones is really, really bad. Like, I mean, I don't know what it's like Stockholm syndrome, you know, in a sense, and a really intense mass version of Stockholm syndrome. Like, whatever you think about gay marriage or not, you are in no position to criticize the past. You are absolutely not. And so the idea that you laugh at the former society, which was patently better than what we're in now, which is only disguised by some of these kind of papering over the cracks we have that, like I've outlined. It's shockingly bad out there. And just the idea of like laughing at Maria Steen for being Catholic or something is just nuts. It's like, okay, well, she's Catholic. What are you? Like, what? She's talking about families and single income families and raising children right and this and that and all the rest of it. And she's very successful. She's a rare example of someone who is doing that well. but she's preaching these values and this form of society. Like, what form of society are you preaching, and how's it going? You know, is it going great? Is it like, I don't know. It's just, I could go on like it blows my mind, you know. And those liberal, those whatever they are, lefties, like they're effectively preaching in favor of the current regime. They wouldn't acknowledge that, but they are. They're saying, no, we've done really good in the last 10, 20 years. All these great things have happened that have been bestowed on us by Fine Gael and BlackRock and Vanguard and NATO and you name it, like the whole broad regime. These things have all been good, and these, like, we're in a good world and we're under good hegemony or whatever it is. It's like, oh man, we're so not, like, and there's something almost kind of tragic about someone who is totally goosed, standing on the high horse about something as inane and sort of irrelevant as a woman's right not to be in the kitchen, so-called, or, you know, it's like, you don't even have a kitchen. You know, you will never have a kitchen, okay? You will never have children. It's going to get really rough out there, and you're mentally addled, understandably, and effectively traumatized. And then you tragically thumb your nose from that situation at someone who has different ideas. I don't, you know, anyway. So that is pretty much that. Yeah, someone says, haha, look at that functional society. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I'm going to bed, basically. So should you. Thank you for joining me. I hope you got something out of this. Thank you, everybody in the chat. Thank you, super chatters, and all the rest of it. I'll talk to you soon. Ihawa. See ya.